Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Welcome, Juma Mubarak. The plants today are wood. This is a construction. It's not yet finished. And it's been made manifest with a salam and with the will of Allah and with money. And all these things came together, but it was all the proxy of Allah. I was reading a translated essay by Brother Jamal, did the translation from Sheikh Hassan bin Maliki, who is unfortunately still in Saudi prison. May Allah expedite his release and preserve him and keep him in good health. And the essay goes on at length about the omission of the Bismillah as a great act of kufr, of covering. This is a simple formal thing, but it covers the truth of the Quran. This is a point that Brother Khalid had made at one point. And this is an aspect of Maliki fiqh because of the tradition of the Hijaz. And this is why Surah Toba doesn't start with the Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Not uncorrelated to that surah having a particularly harsh tone, even for the Quran. It's much harsher than Surah Maida, which has some harsh tones and some very light and loving notes in it. But Surah Toba is very consistently harsh. And the reason is that they didn't put that on the treaty that was broken, thus inciting the infamous sword verse, which is used as a justification of abrogation of all the nice diplomatic defensive warfare verses in the Quran, which I believe is a form of covering the truth, or kufr as well, and then leads to real kafaru in the way of violent, aggressive behaviors, which has marred the reputation of Islam. But Sheikh Malik, he goes on at length about the evils of Muawiyah and how they wouldn't say the Bismillah and so on. And I think maybe it was belaboring the point a bit much, because part of that is simply that the term Ar-Rahman for Allah in Arabic is a descendant or cousin word of Rahmana in Hebrew, which we see in not in the English translate or Greek translations so much, but in the Hebrew original of the Tanakh. And Sana'a was originally, well, not originally, but in the preceding centuries, it had been a Jewish kingdom of converts, but nonetheless, in the Talmudic era, in those centuries between the Talmud and the Quran, and therefore the people of the Hijaz who didn't have that etymology didn't consider Ar-Rahman to be a legitimate name for Allah, and so they didn't adopt. It's not so much they didn't want to say things in the name of God, but that particular name was not fitting to them. But I was struck by a note in the preface of the Sheikh's essay where he mentions that testing is a law of Allah's world. And indeed, this is the answer to the theodicy. Why is there evil in the world? In Islam, why do good things happen to evil people? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why are there people who hardly donate any money who are getting very wealthy off of meme coins and spending it on haram and flagrantly indulging their ego on social media, while simultaneously there are Gazans who are begging for money to buy food that is being sold to them by merchants or gangs that had been donated by the same empire that had donated effectively through borrowing and gifting of money and then reselling them, basically affected by the transitive property gifted them to the oppressing nation that had destroyed their homes and rendered them homeless, perhaps fatherless, perhaps childless, even more horrifying. And they say, well, Allah is testing them because Allah loves them, and they will achieve the highest ranks of paradise for suffering as martyrs, whereas these, not to say that all non-Muslims are kafir, but these truly kafirin individuals who are indulging uproariously in the world and with arrogance and gusto, and with no consideration for how they could be immediately abetting the mercy onto others with just a little bit of their money. They are being tested with wealth and they're failing the test. And their deeds are made to seem pleasing to them, and their hearts are sealed from the conscienticity that there's something more going on in reality than simply they're a lucky super minority that gets to have endless pleasure until they die. And alas, so they fail the test. And so, for those of us who believe in God, we then zoom in and we find that there is a test in how to interpret scripture and how to make decisions about what is right between the various ecclesial traditions that try to lens scriptures and which is the right canon. So if you're a Christian, even if you're a Unitarian Christian, you're lensing the Gospel of John differently. You're sticking to something more of the original, like, Jewish theology with the Messiah. And the Messiah might have an exclusive sonship and so on. There's a spectrum there, but you wouldn't necessarily consider the Quran to be part of your canon. But yet you are more or less tacitly accepting what the Quran's notes are for Christians if we read the Quran in plain words without making it exclusively about an Arabic Messiah as the only way to God, as I read it. And so if you're a Protestant, you have a different canon than Catholics. If you're a Shia Muslim, you have a Hadith canon that's complements the Quran, that's different from the Sunni canon of Hadith. And if you're Quran only, just the Quran, and so on. And then zooming in further, how do we interpret the Quran? And there's a verse in Surah Baqarah that Allah strikes, it is fitting for Allah to strike a parable of similitude even to a gnat, and that the disbelievers say, what did I like that meme, what did he mean by this? Which isn't to say that you're a kafir for questioning what is the right interpretation of the mutashabihat verses in the Quran, or even indeed which verses are mutashabihat, but rather that those who wish to disbelieve take the challenge of interpretation and the lack of super clarity in all things in scripture as an invitation to disbelief. Like, what kind of God is this? I don't know. I don't know about it. This seems like maybe made up. I don't know. I think God would give us more clarity, but this is another theme in the Quran. And the Quran only people tend to overestimate the clarity when the Quran itself is disclaiming it, that there are these tests built into it for those who wish to undertake them. And then you might say, from a Christian point of view, well, the Quran is divinely inspired, but it's not from God; it's from the other guy, and therefore it's intentionally tricky. But the Christian reading of the Bible is laden with tahwil, that, oh, this thing in Job, my vindicator, it actually means the redeemed, means it's talking about Christ, and the seed of the woman will get the revenge for the fall, and that's specific. It's not seed in the general Semitic sense of just like the Jewish nation or the best of humanity to come. Specifically, it means Jesus because we're Christians, and so of course we interpret it that way. And they do a number of readings like this. that, for example, Psalm 110, my Lord said to my Lord, so they capitalize the first Lord and not the second Lord. That my mind is made up. Basically, is anointing this individual as their Khalifa, and so the Christians interpret that as being about the Messiah on Judgment Day, which is similar to how the Shia see Ali, or how the Zoroastrians, who are not totally Orthodox, saw Mithras. And the Jewish reading of that is simply, this is about David being anointed and ordained to overcome against his enemies, because these texts were given to David, alayhi salam. So you see, this Rorschach test is replete, and it comes up in every schismatic differential, the hadiths, even fiqh about finance. I read an Islamic finance paper, and it says, options are haram because of this verse in the Quran: do not consume each other's wealth except through trade by mutual consent. Well, if I want to price an option and write it to somebody or buy it from somebody, that's trade by mutual consent. Maybe I'll lose the premium, or maybe they'll get rinsed on the intrinsic value loss from that running in the money. And we're eating each other's wealth up, but it's through mutual consent, so it's halal. Well, no, but there's this hadith about harar. Well, what does that mean, etc. Right? So even in matters of fiqh, it becomes problematic, and it's not just a Wittgenstein thing. It's by design. Allah could have made things extremely explicit in all these regards, and we are being tested through the design of the tricky bits. But it's not to say that Allah is a Loki-esque trickster figure. Rather, that these challenges are with a purpose. They're not merely tactics of manipulation. Allah could have taken a more overt route with miracles, angelic visitations, sending more prophets in modernity. Now we're getting texts over the internet. We could have had a prophet in 1999 on an Angel Fire webpage, and then we could have gotten another one in 2015 on Tumblr. But Allah didn't choose to go that route. Okay, so the Tumblr prophet would have been a good one, because we had, the Angel Fire prophet is now passe. That's a Gen Xer. We need a millennial. And now we'd be getting a TikTok Zoomer prophet. We just keep update. It's like Windows. We just keep updating the prophets. Well, no, this is not the path that Allah chose. And indeed, the information technology of preserving text was just on the cusp of improving to the point where you could really nail it down. And yet, prior to the point of becoming saturated. And so there really are no world religions after Islam that have achieved scale. We have a number of carve-out, innovative subsects: Islamic modernism, Ahmadi, Babism within Twelver Shia tradition, Ismaili updating through their living Imam lineage, Quranism, Neo-Mutaziliya claiming an Usuli continuity, and so on. Or even like Mufti Abu Layth's sort of quote-unquote progressive Salafism of the Ahl Madina. This is not the general Salaf that you would associate with the Salafi movement, but the specific Salafs that the Muwatta Malik is describing. And that was Usuli tradition, so you don't even have to be outside of what is canonically Sunni to take those positions. Isn't that nice? So what is this madness? Why is it like this? Why would God, I've talked at length about the word of God and the Mutakallamun, this okay, we don't believe in like an incarnate logos. Well, unless we're like Neoplatonists or Braille or something. But we're talking Baghdad 800s. We're Mota Kalimun. We believe in just kind of this vanilla-ish Islam. But why is God intervening in history with words? With words. With words. Why with words? Why it didn't send a flood. God didn't send the flood. It was words. It was words. That's very odd. And it wasn't they're not poetry, but rhetorical words, you know, riddles and enigmas and paradoxes in the words, layers for future generations to interpret. And if you think about, if you were a person in the Warhammer 40K universe, you might ask yourself, why does faster than light travel involve going through a hyperspace dimension that is infested and infected with chaos entities, these demonic tentacle monsters and Slanesh and so on, Szench. Um, why is it like that? Well, okay, I understand that therefore predicates that we are all clinging to this fascist empire of humanity, and the nicest races are like the Tau, who are like sort of more like council communist sort of authoritarians. They're multi-ethnic. They're not. It's not an ethno state. So, or maybe the Eldar a little better. And why is our galaxy so grimdark and we're just constantly fighting? And then here's some undead, but they're robots for some space. So we gotta fight these robot skeletons. And here's the aliens, the Tyranids. They're from out of the galaxy, so that's something fresh. What's going on outside of this galaxy? Well, it's not that good. You gotta fight them. Why is this like this? And the answer is, it's a game world. The design of that reality is engendered towards constant miniature purchase, painting, and roll combat. It's optimized for endless miniature tabletop battles, and you're one of the miniatures. So welcome to the Marine soldier. And then if you think about Dungeons and Dragons, there's this very polytheistic dynamic in there. And I feel it sometimes when I read D&D lore. I hadn't for a while since I became a Muslim, but I consumed a little bit. I listened to a few YouTube videos for fun recently. And there's something, and I was listening to some videos about the old CRPGs that I used to enjoy. And there's something about, these demons come in and they lay waste to people, and their souls are, something as bad is done to their souls. There's no end, ultimate justice in that atrocity. Because this is just another power. This is just another multipolarity that is pulling on things. And it feels very sad in a nihilistic way, even though the hell realms of the planes of Dungeons and Dragons are less intense. They're less bad than what the Quran describes. I mean, there's habitations within them for adapted jinnic entities, and it's not like being a war refugee in Gaza. Even it's not even for them. For the petitioners, it's more like that. But it's not quite as intense of a torment for them either as what the Quran describes. But yet it feels worse. It feels like just beneath the corruption of all of these multipolar forces pulling on things, there's a sort of nihilism but it's a little bit more poetic than the nihilism of the Warhammer universe. And that is because it is a game world. And it is optimized for miniatures, rolling dice, and having combat, but there's also talking. And that talking involves thematics in these different divinity portfolios and these different alignments. And what's the difference between chaotic good and lawful good? It's not just one good. There's, it's not just like an assertion of orthodoxy. And surely we have lawful good Muslims and chaotic good Muslims as well, especially when you look at modernity. There's the tendency to have the sort of Ishki Islamo leftist dynamic among the Western diaspora. Or perhaps you might say like Quranists are sort of like chaotic good Muslims. So, because the game is a little bit more sophisticated, the nihilistic cyclical grinding of its aimless shifting is a little bit more thoughtful than the pure nihilism. There's beautiful things in the D&D world. There's heavens. There's good powers. That's a better way to call them. It's a Planescape nomenclature. It's less shirky. And, the clerics of the D&D multiverse, even the good aligned ones, are guilty of shirk, but they haven't been advised against it. The guidance has not come to them. According to the Quran, they would not be liable yet. So this was something that fell on the Jahiliyyah as something of a pardon that's implied in the Quran. And so I'd contemplated, before I converted Islam, before I had any inkling that I was going to maybe convert to, I wasn't even really thinking about Islam, but it was about a month before I started to pray. I had contemplated a sequel to Planescape Torment called Planescape Lament, right? Just the same ment suffix, but twisted. Lament is a little bit less bad than Torment. Maybe you might say significantly less bad. There's something lingering about it. There's something subtle about it. If I had only spent more time with my mother before she died. If only I hadn't missed my children's childhood. Wow, they're healthy. They've been raised reasonably well. I've provided for them. But they don't love me the way they love the stepfathers who had raised them in that intervening period, for example. It's the lament. It's not like the anguish of a grieving mother who's digging through the rubble in Gaza City in vain, trying to find a proper burial for her 2 toddler boys. It's just lament. And in the story of Planescape Lament, you play the son of Corellin Larethian, the patron of the elves, whom the elves were originally sharded off of, kind of like in End of Evangelion, all the little rays, and they merge into the big ray. And you attempt to you're kind of a jerk. You're like a chaotic good jerk. Like you think you're good, but you're not that good. You try to ascend, and and you fail. In the process, you blow yourself up, and you create a huge wound in heaven, in the chaotic good heaven of Arboreum, in Arvander, in the first level, where the Eldrin, who are the sort of celestial elves, dwell. And then you reincarnate as the Drow Messiah. And Drow are deeply evil race. And you're raised outside of Menzoberranzan by sort of chaotic neutral parents who are like trying to opt out of the evil. And then when you're a young boy, your father takes you into the city of Menzoberranzan, and you see the gnomish slaves being abused, and you see the women misandrously abusing the men in a dark matriarchy of religious, female deity orientation. And you get to make choices. So you can become a chaotic neutral. The best you can do is you can be chaotic neutral and sort of end up being like a leader of like, why don't we stop living in the cities and let's live in like small groups and have like a sort of confederation, stop being in this religion of evil and living on with slavery and all these things. Or you can be um, chaotic evil. Oh, actually, no. You can also be lawful good. You can't be chaotic good. It's a different thing going on here. And in the lawful good version of this character creation setup for this game, you become basically a D&D Muslim prophet. And I hadn't thought about it in advance. It just kind of intuitively crept up on me. And your father is in Mount Celestia. So he's defected from the chaotic good ways. And he's become this sort of like middle-aged, for power, has been alive for like tens of thousands of years, this middle-aged, crusty, like reactionary as it goes. And that you get in touch with this and you get this idea that there's like a monotheistic ultimate reality beyond the multiverse, beyond even the universe, where beyond Ao is just like an intermediary. It's like Neoplatonism. They're all intermediaries. The powers are not really divine. They're just angels. They're like, and people are like worshiping them wrongly and so on. And then you undertake the jihad and you begin to spread this monotheistic religion through Faerun. And in the evil versions, in the chaotic evil version, you lead a rebellion for the other siblings of Loth, who aren't spidery and matriarchal. And you sort of become like an avatar of this male drow power, and then you're ultimately betrayed by him. And in the neutral evil version, you are nihilistic and you betray when you take over Menzoberranzan, but then the other drow matrons and other cities come with a counterstrike and to take the city back, and things are going harshly for you would flee to the surface and end up killed in a cave collapse. So in this version, in the chaotic evil version, you're kafir, obviously, right? And so you descend into Carcerai, the neutral evil / chaotic evil prison hell. And in the lawful good version, where you die in battle, valiantly fighting for like righteousness and monotheism, you end up in Mount Celestia. So you can begin the proper campaign that way. If you go the neutral, chaotic neutral way, you end up in Limbo. And if you're not even serious about your dark messiahship, you end up selling out your own people. You're neutral evil, and you go to Jahannam or Gehenna, to the lowest pit, and you meet a Baranaloth, who are these arc goat demon things that are like behind the blood war, and they're just kind of manipulating the multiverse for entertainment purposes because they're so nihilistic. In other words, it's a game world, so they're acutely tuned into that reality, but from a completely different perspective than this, like, oh, there's a god beyond like all these D&D universes and divine entities and so on. That's like singular, right? Um, and then you move through the planes, starting from these different starting positions, and you get involved in all these machinations going on. I think it was quite a good treatment. And ultimately, I decided not to pursue making that. Besides the IP problems, and that it's a very big story world that would involve a lot of effort. Um, Maybe didn't seem very Islamic, although it is the thematic is actually deeply Islamic. After the fact, after having done this treatment, then I began to investigate Islam and became a Muslim. And so the munafiqun are the neutral evil ones, and the mushrikun are the lawful evil ones. So they're like standing up for something that is nominally correct and it makes logical sense, but they're mixing it with this extra punitive, merciless dynamic. So, of course, we're familiar with this influence. And then the kafirun are just kind of like, they just want to party and rock out and hurt whoever they want. They don't really care. It's more obvious. And the munafiqun are really behind it all, because at least the mushrikun are blindly persuaded by their epistemology, as muddied as it is, and they think that the evil they're doing is what God wants. But the munafiqun know better than that, and with that optionality, they wield the ultimate dark power, and it is the munafiqun ascendancy that has manipulated our own world from the time of Muawiyah to the project for a new American century, planning 9/11. And yeah, there were mushrikun who were going to go to hell thinking that it was God's will that they crashed those planes. There were Salafi Saudi nationals available to do the bidding of the Munafiq ascendancy. And likewise, when the Al Qassam brigadier young men murdered innocent people, you might say, well, that's all propaganda. Actually, no innocent people were harmed on October 7th, 2023. Well, I think that's a stretch. I don't believe that. I think they definitely did. And yeah, sure, probably 30 or 40%, maybe 60% of the civilian casualties that day were actually disproportionate IDF response. But the point is that this is a violation of the Sharia. It's not entirely clear to a lot of people based on some hadiths, including one in Sahih Muslim that immediately follows the hadith that prohibits harming non-combatants in jihad. And then there's one about the night raids, and it says, well, if the women and children die, like they're of the mushriks, so it's okay, basically. And the people who have adopted that into their fiqh are themselves mushriks, and they're also, when they do these deeds, so they adopt the belief that is an act of shirk, and they habituate it into the actual acts of aggression, and then they are kafir mushriks because they're committing the kafaru through this tremendous crime. And so the jihad of Al Qassam Brigade was cursed by Allah for a time, and only after persevering and being on the back foot and being proper martyrs, and so many civilians being martyred, was that curse lifted. And yet not entirely, because there's still an element of shirk in the nationalism. And the way that I was rereading my book, because a Gazan young lady told me that an American guy got interested in Islam through her, and he wanted guidance. So I sent a link to Who Are the Quranists, and I was rereading the first 20 odd pages of it, and I was like, this needs a few edits, but I think it holds up. I think this is pretty good. Now I know more. Some of these things seem a little naive to me now after another year of study. And I mentioned that Mufti Abu Layth was ultimately the last straw. After all the things he had said over the years, it was talking about we shouldn't use the Palestinians as sacrificial lambs for our concept of jihad. They should be allowed to emigrate and pursue like a proper life somewhere else if they want. Not they shouldn't be forced to do it, but if they want to do it. This has become an issue now once again. Muslims are upset with Trump proposing to try and arrange visas for hundreds of thousands of people to be resettled in Albania, Egypt, Jordan, Indonesia. Obviously, no non-Muslim majority countries are coming up on that list. I would like to get some over here, and we can become a locus of dawah, inshallah. But my intention is to help those people that want to get out, not to force them to leave. But also this idea that no, they have to stay and be ruled by Hamas and be like our nexus of iman while they are robbed of a future. And this is what Allah wants. This is to me both a gross extrapolation of the jihad surahs in the Quran, and also it's a little bit selfish because it's not like we're all going, maybe we boycott Starbucks. There's a lot of things to boycott, by the way. You're boycotting half of the Western world and you're still using fiat currency. So it's not even a proper boycott. We have to actually unify as an ummah and adopt a completely new financial system, right? This is, people aren't, but inshallah, maybe we will wake up and see this. So indeed, the weight of all of these lives, of all of this madness and sin, and never, what about Sudan? It's a bigger scale, and it's Muslims doing it, and we're not talking about it as much, right? So we're being tested to ascend in conscientiousity rather than sinking into a nihilism of hypocrisy. And there are many aspects of the Islam extended universe that we see in hadiths and Sufi and Shia mystical traditions with jinn and saints and elaborations on Quranic stories like Sheikh Nurjan talking about Sulaiman alayhi salam going to war with the jinn and airships. Like, wow, it's like Final Fantasy, And it really does elaborate Islam into a game world situation. But at some level, this is an embellishment, And then on the other hand, we have Islamic modernists, we have Quranists, we have Salafists in a sort of Calvinist style coming out of the 1700s, who are trying to beat the wetness out and render the deen something known, predictable, sterile, completely realist, and eschew this game world dynamic that Allah has indelibly created. Except for the test part. So instead of being a game world that is challenging and mysterious and intriguing and predicated on enigmas, it is an exam. So it loses a lot of the fun parts of, it's bad enough that we might fail the exam, but now we have to not even have any vibes. And the Quran is a variation on this modern succession of reinterpretations, is cleaner in a lot of ways, but it still is trying to demystify the deen in many respects. And what if we were emboldened as players of the game? What if we took the Quran's invitation to not be like those who are incredulously asking what God means? Not that the asking is bad, but that the implication, the rhetoric of that verse is that in the asking is an incredulity. Instead, we embrace the madness And we appreciate that this game world that we are struggling through is one of greater richness than Dungeons and Dragons, in the same way that Dungeons and Dragons has a greater richness than Warhammer. Because whereas Dungeons and Dragons has combat plus dialogue, our world has combat and dialogue. And it also has science. So there's a change. It's not a static game world. The rules are evolving as we uncover deeper realities. And additionally, the depth of the dialogue is not just between us and other player characters or predictable non-player characters or prepackaged divinities who are archetypical Jungian actors, but rather that we are engaging with the ultimate God. And so the dialogue is one of unlimited spiritual depth. And this is why when you look at lay religion versus more advanced forms of religion, when you look at village Buddhism versus very sophisticated philosophical Buddhism, or you look at lay Islam where people barely have one surah of the Quran, not even memorized, but familiar on hand, versus the finer points of Sadrian theology versus Akbarian theology, and so on. You can see that there's a fractality to these contemplations that has no end in its yielding. You can go deeper and deeper and find yourself enmeshed in manifold contemplations. And yet, the ultimate contemplation is how do we stop all of this horror? Can we just do we need do these Palestinians need to be victims of history forever? Can we do better for them? Why have we failed them? What is our reasoning? Can we reevaluate this? And indeed, in this time of technology, we might feel with AI coming basically here and emboldening its capabilities every year, that we are becoming obsolete, and we end up as even as Westerners or as empowered Easterners, we become rendered unto the fate of the refugees and the post-colonial quietists who simply resign themselves to extra tahajjud as their only outlet of exemplary agency. And yet, I find, as somebody who just did a thing in business after a lot of hard work, leveraging the AI to accomplish way more in software productivity than I would have been able to, even with more money and a small team, that many things are possible. And inshallah, I will build a masjid, just like I facilitated this house. And inshallah, I will build a village. And inshallah, we will do beautiful dawah. I was thinking about simply inviting people to pray. You have a little flask of water. You offer, you put your hands out. You do a little wudu. Oh, this feels nice. Yeah, no, we're gonna pray. Just follow me, and you do 2 rakas. You say that was Islamic prayer. What do you think of that? And then helping people with food. Obviously, inviting people into marriages where the conversion process is going to be necessary is more expensive, and it's not something you can repeat very much. But if you get a lot of lady converts, as we know that 2/3 or 3/4 of the converts in the West tend to be women, then this creates more of those necessary conversion impetuses. Impeti, I don't know what the Latin conjugation is. And when you're in a situation where you've got 5,000 Muslims out of 20 million people, that's pretty much a demographic lever that you have to pursue. And then inviting people to the masjid, inviting people to get all kinds of benefits for free without needing to get beaten over the head with dogmas first. And then when they have questions, we say, well, there's an interpretation where it's not really saying there was no actual crucifixion, or like, yeah, Ruhudus may well mean the Holy Spirit. There's Shia who believe that. That's what I think, But don't lead with all of this. And then we may be scoring points indeed in making a ripple effect in a rustic, almost neo-medieval, yet in the shadow of the internet, in the shadow of AI, solar energy, what have you, all of these modern technologies. And yet there's something very medieval about a lot of situations in this world when you get outside the Western cities. And I think we'll all be better off if we tune in, turn on, and drop in to the higher levels of gameplay that Allah, inshallah, has prepared for us in our Qadr. May we make dua to be elevated to a Mahmud Maqam and continue striving to level up with the time that we have left before permadeath and a final score finds us. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.